All right. Good evening, everyone. Good afternoon and good morning to all our participants around the world. And welcome to our Salesforce MVP series. This is our sixth sixth edition or sixth episode of our Salesforce MVP series, and we invited Gaurav Kheterpal from NTX Group to be our MVP for tonight. Um, just a little bit of a background. We started this 6 months ago, this series, and we with the goal to invite as much as a lot. With the goal to invite a lot of Salesforce MVPs, and then to make them closer to our Salesforce community here in the Philippines. So we know that a lot of you would like to meet them, to interact with them as much as possible. So here it is. It's what we do. Yeah. So may I call on Joey to introduce our speaker for tonight?
So since I guess we have slides, yeah. So want to introduce you, yeah. So just wanted to introduce myself too. I'm Joey Chan, founder and principal consultant, technical architect of Calgary Solutions. Been with the Salesforce ecosystem for 12 years now, and I'm also one of the leaders here in the Philippines for the Trailblazer Community Group. So to introduce our speaker for the day, we have Gaurav Kheterpal, works in MTX Group, and it's also a Salesforce MVP, and soon enough, I'm sure he's going to be a Salesforce technical architect. So I'll let you take it from here, Gaurav.
Yep, thank you. So let me just share my screen and then we can get started. All right, so I'm hoping you can see my screen and you can see a slide titled Demystifying Salesforce Commerce Cloud Development.
Yes.
All right, excellent. Good evening, good afternoon, good morning, depending on where in the world you are joining from. I think the beauty of virtual meetups is that we can actually cross geographical borders and join groups that something that we have never been able to do before. So over the next 1 hour or so, I'll try and lay a foundation of Commerce Cloud as a product line to you. The expectation is not that you'll become an expert on Commerce Cloud within the next 1 hour, but at least you'll have some sense of what the product is, how do you learn about it, what are the various career opportunities in the Commerce Cloud ecosystem. So this is what I'll cover. First, I'll talk a little bit about B2B versus B2B landscape. Then I'll talk about the evolution of Commerce Cloud in terms of how it has progressed from the early days of when it was called Intershop to Demandware and now to B2C Commerce. This session will mostly be focused on B2C Commerce. I will kind of draw parallels between B2B and B2C, but I will cover B2C Commerce in a lot of detail. And then we'll talk about the overall architecture, how it uses MVC, the old architecture, which was Site Genesis. And then there are some new paradigms like SFRA and headless commerce, which I'll explain to you. Headless is also called API first commerce. It's relatively new, and I'll kind of explain what it means and how is it different from the traditional B2C commerce architecture. Then I'll show you a demo of SFRA. Site Genesis is deprecated now. I'll see if I have a demo site for Site Genesis as well. Then we'll do a recap, and although it says Q&A towards the end, but I think we have an advantage. So being virtual, you can use the chat box and ask as many questions as you like, and I'll try and answer those to the best of my ability. So before we start, I just wanted to thank you for taking the time to attend this session. I know that everybody everywhere is going through a challenging time due to this pandemic, and it's very difficult to focus on things. It's very difficult to focus on learning. So thank you for sparing 1 hour and joining this session. Thank you to Joey and to Neil as well. I know that Joey had reached out to me a few times, and this session was originally, I think, scheduled for October, and then I had some other commitments, and we moved the date around a little bit. But I'm really glad that we are finally able to do it, and I'm hoping that everybody will find it useful. So before we begin, I know that in Manila it's a little bit late, and a lot of you would be having dinner and probably getting ready to go to bed. So just to keep it interesting, as I said, use the chat and ask whatever doubts you have, and towards the end, I'll take all the questions before we wrap it up. Okay, so a little bit about myself. I'll not spend too much time on it. I entered the Salesforce ecosystem in 2007. My wife actually calls it, I married Salesforce in 2007 because I spend a lot of time on Salesforce on a day-to-day basis, and that is something that she doesn't like. I've been very fortunate to have a very rewarding career in the Salesforce ecosystem. I became an MVP 5 years back. About 4 years back, Salesforce actually asked me to teach Commerce Cloud in APAC because there was a lot of demand in partners and customers, but they did not have somebody who would be able to teach this. And that's how I kind of, it also helped me kind of get a deeper perspective on Commerce Cloud and in general in the e-commerce domain. I'm an Einstein champion. I have done a lot of work on the Salesforce Einstein AI platform, and that is more out of my personal interest rather than out of professional commitments. Since I've been around for a very long time, I've done a number of certifications. CTA and Education Cloud are the two remaining, and I've never worked on Education Cloud. I tried studying and attempting that certification. I failed. I tried again and I failed. And I've decided that I'm kind of going to put it on hold for now and spend about a month studying and then take it up again. And I work at a company called MTX Group, which is a Salesforce and MuleSoft partner. And we do commerce implementations as well. Okay, so moving on, this is, I think Joey already asked this question, but I usually have a slide in here. I ask people if they are developers, and then developers are always people who claim it's not a bug, it's a feature. That's how we've kind of been brought up. And that's a good line of defense. So if you are a developer and if you have not used that, trust me, it works. Designers are people who talk in style sheets and layouts and CSS, and this is currently my style thanks to the pandemic. No exercise, no workouts, and administrators. It's not an easy job being a Salesforce administrator. You get one thing wrong and you screw up the org, and you can screw up implementations for customers. So a happy administrator is needed to do a happy implementation and a happy customer. So with that context, let's actually talk about e-commerce in general. And e-commerce has come a long way since it was since it first originated. So these are some statistics which I've pulled from Salesforce, and uh, about 50% of commerce transactions are from mobile phones. Not really a surprise. I mean, we use our smartphones all the time to do e-commerce transactions. There's 100% growth in social commerce, which is basically you look up products on social sites like Instagram or Facebook or Twitter. Somebody recommended something, and then you kind of get influenced to buy it. And then greater than 50% in-store sales are influenced by digital. You just search for a product, Google showed you certain results, and that kind of prompted you to go into a store and check out if there are some offers on that product. And then most importantly, 25% purchases span multiple touch points. So probably you looked up the product on your phone, and then you were on your laptop and you decided to buy it, or you went into the store and you thought that maybe I can get a better deal on this online, and you used your phone. So in general, the overall commerce experience has completely transformed. Earlier it was you opened the site, you placed the order, and you were done with it. Now it's a little more diverse in the sense there are multiple touch points, and then the whole experience has a social aspect to it as well. There is obviously a key difference between B2C commerce and B2B commerce, and I do want this session to be very interactive. So I would actually ask somebody from the audience to, if they can explain the difference between B2C and B2B. Just unmute yourself and speak up.
B2C is when you, the consumer, are purchasing directly from the business, and B2B is when companies buy from each other, which I haven't done myself.
Yeah, great answer. So B2C is when you as a seller are selling directly to the end customers. B2B is when you are actually selling it to companies or to other sellers, and they in turn are selling to the end customers. And Salesforce has offerings for both B2C commerce and B2B commerce. The B2C commerce is actually the offering which was originally called Commerce Cloud. And there is a little bit of history. So because a lot of people get confused between what is B2C commerce, what is Commerce Cloud, what is B2B commerce. So let me take you back in time. There was a company called Intershop. Then the company renamed itself to call it Demandware. And this was the name of the company when Salesforce acquired it. That is the B2C commerce play. So they have a product which is basically suited for building storefronts where you can actually list products, and users can come and buy those products. After the acquisition, they decided to name the product as Salesforce Commerce Cloud. And then something interesting happened. They acquired another B2B commerce company called CloudCraze. And it was a little bit confusing as to what Commerce Cloud was eventually referring to. And then they decided, okay, let's rename it. So Demandware becomes B2C commerce, CloudCraze becomes B2B commerce. And now there is also a term called Commerce Cloud, which originally meant B2C commerce, but now it's more of an umbrella term, which is encapsulating both B2C commerce and B2B commerce. So next time when somebody asks you, do you know Commerce Cloud, they are probably referring to both B2C commerce and B2B commerce. If not, then it's mostly about B2C commerce. B2B is not that well known as an offering because it's relatively new. I think 2018 or 2017 was when that acquisition was made. And then there are a number of other differences as well. So B2C commerce, when you talk about doing B2C commerce development, it is full stack JavaScript development, completely different stack from your Salesforce development. So there is no Apex, no Lightning, completely different. There is Node.js in the backend, and you use a number of JavaScript and CSS frameworks in the front end. On the contrary, B2B commerce is actually a managed package on Salesforce. So everything that you do for B2B commerce development is actually Salesforce development in a way, but it is on the e-commerce domain. And then B2B commerce, it was traditionally using Visualforce. Now they have a new offering, which is basically for Lightning as well. So they have two products, which is the Visualforce, which is the legacy product. And now there is a new product which actually supports Lightning as well. So let's talk about Commerce Cloud architecture. And as I said in the beginning, I will focus mostly on B2C commerce, and I'm hoping that sometime in future I can come back and do a session on B2B commerce as well. So from an architecture perspective, this is at a high level what the Salesforce Commerce Cloud architecture looks like. If you see the bottom layer, it's the platform operations, which is kind of the core layer for all the Salesforce products. It has features like reliability, security. It's a multi-tenant platform. Can anyone unmute themselves and tell me what is a multi-tenant platform or a multi-tenant application?
I wanted to give the chance to speak to someone else, but it's like an apartment building. There's a lot of people living there, sharing the resources. That's the canonical analogy.
Yeah, great answer. So it's like you are sharing resources and you are all tenants, and you are expected to be good tenants so that you do not cross your limits. And then the resources are equally shared between all the other resources. So Salesforce core platform is also multi-tenant, and it has a feature which kind of ensures that the multi-tenancy is actually respected by all the tenants. Can someone unmute themselves and tell me what is it that Salesforce provides to preserve that multi-tenancy? It's a very common feature and something that developers hate.
Governance limits.
Owner limits.
That is correct. So governor limits, I mean, as bad as they are, but they kind of ensure that you actually write good code, you use good architecture. So similarly, Commerce Cloud has governor limits of its own. We don't really call them governor limits, we call them platform limits. But going back, so it obviously uses a multi-tenant architecture, and there is a global release model. So Salesforce has 3 releases per year. With Commerce Cloud, it's actually one major release every month. And then for each month, there is a release. So there are 12 releases in a year. Then we have a retail data model. So similar to how you have objects in the core Salesforce platform, here you have a number of objects which are mostly related to e-commerce. So you have an object for order, inventory, product, customer, and then there are a number of other objects as well. And the best part is that it's a very flexible platform. So you have solutions for in-store, you have solutions for digital, you can build a website, or you can actually just store the data and expose some APIs so that you can actually build a what we call as a API first e-commerce site as well. And I'll kind of explain how that architecture works. And on top, you see that there are a number of customer interaction touch points. So there are phones, tablets, desktops. You can use kiosks, you can walk into the store, or you can even use chat interfaces to interact with the system. Now let's talk about the physical architecture. Is there a question? Okay. Now let's talk about the physical architecture. So similar to Salesforce, B2C Commerce has multiple data centers all over the world. These data centers are split up into what we call as pods. A pod is basically a rack of servers placed in a geographical location. So for example, EU has certain pods. America has a number of pods. Asia Pacific has a number of pods. It is equivalent to what you have as a realm, as a instance in your Salesforce world. So for example, NA1 or EU07. So that is equivalent to a pod in the world of Commerce Cloud. These pods are split up into realms. A realm is basically what we call as a logical segregation of this multi-tenant view for any customer. So a realm is basically something that is dedicated to you, or if you are a customer, that is dedicated just to your just those resources are only for you. Nobody else is using those resources. And again, as I said, it's a logical segregation. All the data, all the code in that particular logical entity is actually exclusively owned by you. Based on what I just described, can anyone tell me what would be the equivalent of a realm in Salesforce? It's very common.
Sounds like an org.
That is correct. Yeah, so org is what you have in Salesforce, and realm is what you have in Commerce Cloud. Then each realm has 2 instance groups, a primary instance group and a secondary instance group. The primary instance group has 3 kind of instances: development, staging, and production. Production is obviously where you make all the changes and you do debugging. No, that's not quite right. You never do debugging and you never make changes directly to production. Staging is basically an instance where you do all the data enrichment and typical activities like which merchants do, loading product data, loading inventory data. Development is kind of a misnomer. It says development, but this is actually not where you do the development. This is usually used by QAs for doing their testing. Sandboxes are where you actually do development as developers. And the difference between primary instance group and secondary instance group is sandboxes are typically a little bit lower grade in terms of memory and CPU footprints, while all the primary instance group instances are higher grade in terms of CPU support, in terms of memory, and all the other resources as well. So the typical life cycle is when you are working on a Commerce Cloud implementation, each developer would have their own sandbox. And I do not show it, but typically somewhere here you would also have a source control. So for example, a Git repository or a Bitbucket repository where the developers would be checking in their changes. A primary instance group, as I said, developers do their changes on sandboxes, they push it out to staging. From staging, it is pushed to development for QA testing. And once QA blesses that this is good to go, then you push it out to production. That's the typical life cycle of a commerce implementation. So when Commerce Cloud was initially formed, it was an architecture which was built for the desktop. but I showed you some statistics, and considering that there is so much emphasis on phones and tablets, it has pivoted to what we call as a mobile first architecture. So the image that I have here, it kind of shows that we have more smartphones on planet Earth than tablets, more tablets than desktops, and more tablets than laptops, and more laptops than desktops. So desktops are used to be the primary form factor. Now it is kind of the least used form factor in a number of consumer applications. And that's the reason why, from having applications which could support mobile, and mobile was a good to have, now we build applications in e-commerce which are usually mobile first. The reason, again, some statistics which I pulled in from a site, a lot of people would not recommend a business with a bad mobile site. 40% would turn to a competitor's site after having a bad mobile experience. And then a lot of people would actually curse at their phones when a site doesn't work. And I'm sure we all have done that at some point of time in our lives. So let's talk about the legacy architecture, and then I would be able to kind of explain in terms of the changes that have happened and what Salesforce has fixed over the years. So when we, this was again several years back, about till about 2014-15, they used an architecture called Site Genesis. It was an MVC implementation, but the problem was that it was not a pure MVC implementation. It used JavaScript in certain layers, but it also had what we called as D scripts or demandware scripts, which was a proprietary implementation by demandware for certain other things. So models, okay, before I actually get there, I actually want somebody to unmute and tell me what is MVC. Please just don't say model view controller. It would be great if you can just briefly explain what each of these layers does. And I want somebody else than Orlando to answer, because I want to make sure everybody else is awake.
Could volunteer someone, Gaurav.
Sorry, I couldn't catch that.
You could volunteer someone.
Sure. Whoever wants to go for it.
If it's okay, it's the separation of layers of concerns to break down a system between data, business logic, and user interface. So you have separation of responsibilities and
That is correct, yes. So typically models are an abstraction of your data. View is your presentation layer, and controller is where you actually have the business logic. You could also add a service layer to free up your controllers from dealing with the business logic. So the problem with the site Genesis architecture was it used a lot of proprietary things. It used demandware scripts. For modeling, it used something called ISML, which is interstore markup language for view templates. The problem was that models did not end up being a pure abstraction of data. And then there was no separation of concern. I could actually do anything from, so I could directly access data from any layer, and it was not strictly enforced. And then it was actually easy to do development because you could take a lot of shortcuts. But when you are developing a e-commerce site, which would potentially have millions of transactions every day, that's not really a good idea. And then the proprietary frameworks did not scale beyond a certain point of time as well. So that's when they decided that they need to revisit the whole stack. And that's when they came up with a new architecture. So this is what a site Genesis site looked like. In terms of the overall experience on a desktop, it was beautiful, worked really well. But when it came to rendering these sites on a smartphone or a tablet, it was not really a first class citizen experience. That's when Salesforce decided they will build a new architecture, and they called it storefront reference architecture. Before it was called storefront reference architecture, they decided to call it mobile first reference architecture, because it was essentially meant to be a mobile first architecture. But the MFRA term was misleading because it had a word mobile in it, and it kind of did not get the message that it would actually work well on the other form factors as well. So they kind of standardized on the SFRA convention. What were the changes? If you see the overall architecture, everything else kind of remained the same, except there were two things. There was a new API layer added, and then this whole presentation layer was completely revamped. So rather than using proprietary ISML modules, we started using a number of open source frameworks on the presentation layer as well. So how did they do it? They kind of surveyed 2000 customer stores which had been built on demandware over a period of time, and then they standardized on a number of recommendations in terms of each layer, which would allow people to make rapid customizations and, more importantly, do seamless updates. Uh, in terms of the overall architecture, it was still MVC, but now it was a more pure implementation. So you could not take shortcuts, in the sense that you could not actually deal with models directly from the view layer, and then controllers were doing what they were supposed to do. You could actually add a service layer, and then they introduced concepts of modules and super modules to bring in the required inheritance as well. This is what it looked like on a desktop. I'll actually show you this running on a phone, on a tablet, and browser as well. So you'll be able to appreciate how this kind of works well on all the form factors. This was until about earlier this year that the e-commerce domain actually decided, e-commerce domain was diversifying into what we call as a headless architecture. So the headless architecture is that I actually like certain aspects of the e-commerce platform which Salesforce provides, but I don't really like the way it forces me to create my presentation layer. So the idea was that you could actually pick and choose building blocks from Commerce Cloud. You could potentially use just the data model. You could use the data model and the APIs, but you could have your view layer in a completely separate environment. You could build it as a pure web application hosted on Heroku, hosted on AWS, Google Cloud, wherever you want. But you did not have that flexibility earlier, which API first commerce now gives you. So the overall idea, as I said, was to move away from tools like Page Designer. This is equivalent of Page Builder if you are familiar with that particular application in Salesforce. The idea is simple. You use drag and drop to kind of build out your pages and create the overall view experience to a completely custom experience. And as I said, you basically own the view layer or the presentation layer, and you can build it just the way you want. That is possible using headless commerce or the API first architecture. So as I said, it brings in a lot of flexibility. You have a digital experience layer, which did not pretty much exist earlier. And then you are free to use a Heroku app or any third-party app that you want. And then the headless e-commerce system still provides that particular data model. It still provides features like recommendation engine, inventory. On top of everything, there is an API. So you can actually access that API through your Heroku applications, or through the custom head that you built, or through the digital experience layer. The advantage of doing this is now you are not limited to phones, tablets, and computers. You can actually have, so for example, Amazon have devices like small gadgets from where you can actually place orders. You can actually integrate e-commerce into smart refrigerators, smart cars, and then there are a lot of other possibilities as well. There was an excellent session on last year Dreamforce about headless commerce and the potential that it has, and I'll try and see if I can pull up a link to that, and I'll share it with the group. So with that, I think the talking ends there. Let me actually show you in terms of what a B2C commerce environment looks like. So,
quick question, by the way. With regards to the front end, what do typical companies use in terms of building the front end for the B2C, considering they have a headless setup?
yeah,
I mean,
so
what's the common process? Yeah.
Yeah, it could be anything. There are implementations which use AngularJS, React.js. You could actually use a lot of templating frameworks like Handlebars. You could use CSS frameworks like Bootstrap for styling. So there is a lot of flexibility that it actually offers.
All right, cool.
So I'll just log into one of my sandboxes. So I'm sure you're used to seeing a Salesforce org, and this is something which looks completely different. The first thing which we see here is there is a pop-up which shows new in Salesforce B2C Commerce. I told you there are monthly releases. So this particular sandbox is actually running. 20 stands for 2020. That's an year which nobody will forget thanks to coronavirus. And .9 actually means this is the release for September. So this is a sandbox which has not been updated for October. And it actually shows me what all changes were there in this particular release. So I'll skip it for now. And then on the top left, you'll see that I can actually select an e-commerce site. So for example, I'll select RefArc, which is a sample site which every sandbox has. If I click on storefront, I can actually see what this particular site would look like. So this is an SFRA sample site. The tracking consent is thanks to GDPR, which kind of wants to make sure that I agree with the site storing cookies and my information. And then this is the homepage of my particular site. And then there are a number of elements here which are very similar to any e-commerce site that you would use. So on the top, there is a search bar where I can search specific products. There is an icon for cart. And then this particular thing is what we call as categories, or also we call as navigation. And within each category, I can see that there are subcategories as well. So let me actually go to a specific category and a subcategory. So I go to new arrivals and men's. And I see that there is a list of products that shows up here. This page where we see a list of products, in e-commerce terminology, we call this a product listing page, also called as a PLP. If I click on a specific product, it shows me that particular product. It shows me a lot of information about that product. And this particular page is called PDP or a product detail page. Again, a lot of information about the product. And then if I go back to the PLP, on the left, I see a lot of information which actually help me search for the right product. This is what we typically call as search refinement. So I can actually pick a color, I can pick my budget, and then I can pick certain products, which actually helps me shortlist the product that I'm looking for. So there are obviously multiple ways in which you can shop for a specific product. I could use these categories and subcategories, or I could actually just search for the product that I want. So for example, I'm looking for a laptop bag with wheels. If I just search for that, I can actually directly go to that product. And then the usual e-commerce suspects, I can add that product to the cart. I can check out. There are a number of billing methods. I can check out as a guest. I can check out, I can log in, and I can subscribe, and all of that is there. From a developer perspective, once you are building a site, there is this small icon on the left, which is very, very handy. This is what we call as storefront toolkit. It's a developer tool. If I just choose an option from here called request log, it will actually show me that what is actually happening behind the scenes. So let me actually clear it and let me hit this particular home page again. Are you able to see a window called request log? I just want to make sure, because I don't know if Zoom is showing both the windows.
We don't.
Okay, I'm glad I asked. So let me actually share my whole screen so you can see it.
Quick question though. Am I correct that this one is spelled using SFRA? Is that right?
That is correct, yes. Okay, so now I shared my whole screen. So you should be able to see a pop-up window called request log. Can you confirm you can see it now?
Yes.
Yes.
Okay, excellent. So if you see that this particular URL, the last part of this portion is called home show. So what is really happening here is that there is a controller called home.js, and in that controller, there is a method called show, which is actually being invoked. So if I just come here and I search for home show, it should be showing it somewhere here. And it would also show me certain errors. So for example, this is very useful for debugging. So if I want to see certain errors, if I just change the name of the method and I say home show 1, it actually tells me that this particular page is not existing. And if I want to see what really went wrong here, I can see that the function show1 was not found in the controller home. So this is in general very helpful for debugging all sorts of developer issues. And if you come from a Java background, you will see that this is a stack trace, what we call as a stack trace in Java. And it actually is very, very helpful. It tells you the line number in your specific controller, which is great to debug your specific issues. In addition to request log, there are a number of information. So let me actually go back to the home page. So I'm on the home page. I open the storefront toolkit and I open something called page information. Now there is this little tooltip that comes in and it shows me open template, open local include, open template, open controller. So as I showed you, any page that you open is actually, if we talk about the MVC architecture, the hit is going to the controller. The controller is actually then rendering a specific template. So I can then actually click on these. I don't have the setup here. This is my personal laptop, but the idea is that if you have everything set up in your workspace, then if you click here, it will actually take you to your workspace and it will allow you to basically debug or open that particular controller and template, and then actually debug that particular controller and template if there is a specific issue. The important thing here is that if you see, if I navigate to specific sections of the page, the controller and the template are actually changing. And if I come right to the bottom of this page, it is changing again. So the idea here is that this particular page, and in general any page that you will come across in B2C commerce, is built up of multiple components. It is built up of multiple templates. So for example, at a very high level, if I were to classify, this page has 3 components. One is a header, one is a footer, and everything else in between is content. And that content itself, it is split into multiple templates because this is coming from different places, and we actually segregate and consolidate all of this into templates. Otherwise, there would be a lot of duplication. So for example, if I go here, let me just get rid of this. So you will see that on the home page, I have header, footer, and body, and the body has certain content. If I go to a specific PLP, the header is there, the footer is there, but the body has changed. So if you talk about in terms of HTML, the header HTML is there, the footer HTML is changed, and this particular part is all the dynamic HTML. So if you want to see where this particular dynamic HTML is being rendered from, then you can use the page information. Similar to page information, I can actually see content information. So if I click on content information, and if I go back to my home page, you will see that if I hover over certain sections, it says edit content slot. This is a slightly advanced concept. So for example, this is a particular banner which is referring to a promotion for summers, and this was created by a merchant. They can actually come here and modify certain aspects of this. If I want to change the image, if I want to change the look and feel, all of this is possible. Again, the idea is that when merchants are doing the configuration, they can actually use this tool to kind of identify any issues with their products or their content slots, and use it to fix those issues. There's one more important thing here, which is cache information. So if I actually come here, you will see that these icons show up now. And if I hover over any of these icons, it actually tells me that this section of the page is cached until a certain time. If I go to cart, this is not cached. If I go to login, this is not cached. And then there are certain aspects of the page which are cached for different durations of time. Can anyone tell me why we should not be caching the cart? Anyone who wants to unmute themselves and answer that?
Well, we
Credit
would
card?
have stale data, right?
Yep. You might end up with stale data. You have certain data in the cache, and the user actually changed their cart and added and removed products. Also, it's actually a legal requirement not to cache users' preferences and cart or their shopping preferences. So you can store them in an object so that users can come back to it, but it's generally not advised to cache this kind of data. Okay, so caching, we know in web applications, the idea is that you want to store certain pages so that it avoids unnecessary hits to the platform. Yeah, let me actually show you how this particular thing would look like. So I'll just use the browser emulator and let's see how it looks like on an iPad simulator. Let's actually see the iPad. Yeah, so you'll see that mostly, I mean, you would see that it's responsive, and then it is the kind of interface that you would expect on an iPad as well. Everything would render well, and so for example, for image, now I have a carousel which I can use. Similarly, on the iPhone as well, it would render well, and it kind of fits in to the overall resolution. This did not happen on site Genesis, so it was not really a mobile first experience in that sense. Okay, let me go back to my slides. So how do you learn Commerce Cloud? And again, to be honest, it's not an easy product to learn, but the primary reason for that, it's not technical difficulties, but there are a lot of entry barriers. And I've not really looked at the chat, but I'm sure there are certain questions around that as well. So first and foremost, you need a sandbox, because to learn anything, you need to practice. It's not easy to get a sandbox in Commerce Cloud. It was much harder to get a sandbox in Commerce Cloud till last year. Now, if you work for a partner, there is actually a group on partner community called on-demand sandboxes. You can actually request a sandbox there, and then they have certain paperwork that they need you to sign, and then you can get a sandbox. The other way to get a sandbox is you actually run through a Salesforce training, a Trailhead Academy training, and that's when you get a sandbox for 3 weeks, which is usually enough to kind of learn the basics and clear the developer certification. But the only other way is that you need to be a partner for Commerce Cloud with Salesforce, and that gives you access to a sandbox. The other thing which has traditionally not been easy is resources in terms of learning Commerce Cloud. Now we have something called Commerce Cloud Developer Center, which is an absolutely fantastic resource. Again, very, very new. And then depending on what you are actually doing, so for example, if you want to look at certain APIs, you want to look at SFRA architecture, you want to use the drag and drop tool, you can pretty much do everything from there. So for example, if you want to look at APIs and how a certain API works, you can actually go here. You can actually try out APIs as well. It provides you with a Swagger-like interface from where you can actually look at certain APIs. So for example, if I want to see APIs for customers, I would go here. And then it would actually provide me with the API specification from where I can actually test out this particular API as well. So for example, I can see it's a post request, and I can actually try it out here from here with some dummy parameters, and I can see what is the output, what are the expected attributes, and so on and so forth. And then there, as I said, this has to be your number one resource if you want to learn Commerce Cloud. There are certain other resources as well, and I'll come to that. But before that, some case studies from Commerce Cloud, and these are from all over the world. A lot of them are from US because that's where the product is very, very popular. I think if you are from Philippines, you might identify with Puma, a very popular sports brand. I think most of the others may not be that active in Philippines. Let's talk about certifications. Again, I think that is usually a high interest area for most people. So there are 4 certifications, 2 for B2B and 2 for B2C. And without a doubt, I mean, I can say that these are 4 of the toughest Salesforce certifications out of the overall 33 certifications that exist. Because you need to know your stuff, you need to have practiced. And thankfully, I think there are no dumps available for these exams, because the exam council, and I've been a part of that, we keep changing the questions on a regular basis. How do you prepare for these? Again, Developer Center is a good place to start. But for example, for the advanced certification, like a certified B2C Commerce architect, this is a really difficult exam, and you need to have a lot of hands-on experience. So ideally, I would recommend if you are working on B2C commerce for at least a couple of years, then you might want to attempt these. B2B commerce, it's a different challenge altogether. Limited resources, but again, you can take a Trailered Academy class, and then there is an internal wiki which has a lot of good information on B2B commerce as well. Okay, some recap and references. We learned about mobile first architecture. We talked about Commerce Cloud as a terminology. We looked at the old architecture, which was Site Genesis. We talked about the new architecture, SFRA, as well as API first or headless commerce. Um, I didn't really touch upon use cases, but it's fascinating that it's not just e-commerce. B2C commerce is actually used for a number of other use cases as well. And in the pandemic, it has actually been used for a lot of innovative use cases. So for example, doctors using B2C commerce to offer telemedicine and accepting payments through B2C commerce. A lot of airports all over the world, like Heathrow, Gatwick, they have actually been using B2C commerce for parking tickets and customers being able to pay for those parking tickets. And then it is a lot more diverse beyond the classical retail that we are used to as a e-commerce use case. And I'll share this deck. I also have listed a video which is from YouTube. It's again a good reference, and I'll share out some other links as well. So with that, I think the content is kind of ending. I'll just share one more link. There is a course, and I'll be a shameless plug here. And again, I don't benefit out of it. There is a Pluralsight course, which is about 2 hours, which I did with Don Robbins, who's a fellow Salesforce MVP. And this is good timing because it's actually free for this particular weekend. So if you go to Pluralsight and if you search for this particular course, you can take this course from Friday to Sunday. And I talk about pretty much everything that I covered, but in a lot more detail. So we dissect the MVC architecture, we talk about performance and a lot of other things that I could not cover here. So that's it as far as the content was concerned. Joey, I'll hand it off to you.
Sure. Thank you. Any questions? Feel free though. So one thing regarding the partnership, when requesting for that sandbox environment, do we just need to be a consulting partner, or do we have to be a Commerce Cloud
you
partner?
have to be a Commerce Cloud partner, actually. So
I see.
The way I would approach it is, if you are a consulting partner, approach all consulting partners above a certain tier have a PAM, which is a partner account manager. So raise a request to them, and then they can actually get you connected with the Commerce Cloud team, and then they can get you started with the paperwork. You actually get a free sandbox as well. I think it is silver and above. You actually get a complimentary sandbox as well as part of the partner benefits. That's also
I see.
there.
Cool. How is the demand though? Is it geared towards mostly for medium to large companies, or have you seen this being used by the smaller enterprises?
Yeah, so in the customer ecosystem, I would say that it's mostly large enterprises, large B2C commerce storefronts. The reason for that is their licensing for customers is very different. So a lot of other platforms like a SAP Hybris or a Magento, they would charge you a licensing fee. Here, from a customer perspective, there is no licensing fee. Instead, what Commerce Cloud does is, if you want to partner with them, if you want to build a storefront on Commerce Cloud, they will actually take a cut out of your overall revenue. So for example, if your site is making $1 million a month, there would be a percentage that they would actually take from the revenue. So that model is usually more suitable for larger storefronts, and not so much for smaller storefronts.
Yep. Am I correct? They have a certain minimum price or
That is correct.
percentage of
Yes.
your sales. Okay. Yeah. That's how a lot of the malls here does it. Do it.
Yeah, I see a lot of questions in the chat. So do you want me to kind of take them one by
Sure.
one?
Yeah.
Okay, so I see the answers for the questions I have. Commerce Cloud templates, SFRA, what do they generate in the backend? So Commerce Cloud templates, they work very similar to templates, any templating framework like Django or Handlebar. So the idea is that you write templates because you don't want to write hard code anything in the HTML. The idea is that based on the user request, all the parameters are filled in into those templates from the request. And then at the end of the day, it actually generates dynamic HTML for you. So yeah, SFRA, I think I already answered it.
So, am I correct? The customization for this is using JavaScript, not Java, right? Is it?
It is correct. Yeah, you use
Okay.
JavaScript, not Java.
Mm.
And I see we have Vladimir on. Vladimir, if you don't know him, is actually a very well-known figure. He runs a lot of enablement sessions for Salesforce in the Marketing Cloud and the Pardot and Datorama and everything related to marketing. And he mentions
Oh.
B2B Commerce does not cover B2B Lex. And then, so B2B is a managed package. What does SFRA interface generate in the backend? Can you say more about B2B Lex? Yeah, B2B Lex is completely separate. B2B now has two products, B2B Visual Force. I think that's what they call the old product. And B2B Lex is essentially that same product which is compatible with Lightning Experience. It has absolutely nothing to do with SFRA. SFRA is all B2C, and Lex and the Visual Force versions are for B2B. Are you able to implement e-commerce with CPQ package, and how is the integration experience? Yes. So it does have a CPQ connector. Actually, let me show you. It really depends on what you want to do. So typically, and this is actually a good point. I kind of rushed through it, so I did not show these. I just showed you the storefront, but there is a lot of configuration options that you get for developers, for admins, for merchants as part of this interface. One of those is actually price books, and that's where CPQ comes in. So you get basic price book functionality as part of B2C commerce, but this can also integrate with external price book systems. It can integrate with CPQ. And if I were to show you what a typical price book looks like, so for example, I opened a price book called USD sales prices. So this is for US currency. And if I search for a specific product, then it shows me the prices for all the products that I have for my storefront. So if you see, for example, the first product, there is a specific price that is allocated to it. And then I can actually add a price table. So I can control that this particular product would change the price based on certain promotions. So Christmas is coming up and I could change the price based on that. So you have basic price book functionality built into it, but you can actually integrate it with CPQ and with external price book systems as well. While I'm here, let me actually show you what the data model also looks like. So, and my apologies, I should have covered it. It's in the administration section. So we have, similar to Salesforce, we have a concept of standard objects and custom objects. The difference is here, they are called system objects. So for example, let's look at product. So product has a number of attributes, similar to how you have a lot of attributes in your Salesforce objects as well. So if I want to see them all, I can do that. Otherwise, you'll see that we have usual suspects: name, product picture, is the product for sale, is it a new product, and then you can add new attributes as well. So I can actually add whatever attribute I want. I can specify order value, and I can pick a name for it. I can decide the data type for it. and so on and so forth. I can make a number of changes here as well. A lot of other options. So for example, I want to import a site. I can do that from here. So for example, I have a couple of sites here, demo sites. I can export a site as a zip and then I can import it into another sandbox. I can import metadata, export metadata as well. Those options are here as well, import and export. I can control preferences like locales. I can control sequences for order search, a lot of information. And then the best part is that there is a lot of operational features also available. So you can actually, once you've built the site, that's when you deal with a lot of operational features, like the performance is not great. And then you have tools like a pipeline profiler. So for example, I can turn on this profiler. Right now it's capturing data. So now if I go back to my site and if I hit a particular controller, so if going by the earlier analogy, I have hit a controller called search and show. And if I refresh this particular page, it shows me that in this site, I hit a controller search, and then I also hit a controller called show. If I want to see what kind of performance I'm getting on it, there's a lot of drill down available. So it shows me that this particular show, there were 2 hits. This was the average time, and it was actually rendering 2 templates. One of them was search results. And within that template also, I can see, I can go very detailed in terms of, so I can actually get to know that whether the time is actually being consumed on the view layer, the controller layer, the model layer, and then I can do some performance optimizations based on that. A lot of very, very useful tools that you get as part of the access to that sandbox. Sorry, I got sidetracked, but I wanted to make sure that I cover this part. So CPQ, I think I took. There's a question around OMS and document management system. So there is actually a new offering from Salesforce called Salesforce Order Management System. And again, B2C Commerce integrates with that. You can look it up, and as well as the architecture is flexible and you can actually integrate with external OMS systems as well. Document management system, I don't know what you're referring to here, but I think it's probably a CMS. If that's the case, content management system, yes, you can actually integrate this with a CMS. There's actually a lot of authoring capability available within here. So for example, I had shown you content areas and content slots. So let me actually show that again. So there is some CMS authoring capability built in here. I can actually go and create content slots. So let me just, yeah, I can go and create content assets. And if I were to show you a simple banner, so for example, this is a banner which shows up when I search a specific product which does not exist. So let me actually go here and search for a product. And then it shows me a particular banner. It should show up here. It's a little bit slow, but the idea is that I can actually configure the whole look and feel. I can actually add HTML body. So in that sense, it has a lot of CMS capabilities that merchants typically use for authoring content. I attended a Commerce Cloud UI session. We did a little JS and point and click design. The concept of cartridge was mentioned a lot. Is it still the norm? So good point again. So let me actually show you what is a cartridge. So cartridge is a building block in terms of Commerce Cloud development. And within that cartridge, you would have a lot of things like controllers, modules, super modules. And then this is what a cartridge path looks like, and everything that is mentioned here is actually a cartridge. So a cartridge typical structure would be you would have controllers, you would have, so each of those layers you would have certain components that are a part of that particular cartridge. To kind of explain it in layman terms, if you have a Commerce Cloud project and somebody asks you to implement a new feature, typically you would either do it in an existing cartridge or you would build out a new cartridge for that specific feature, and then you would actually add that cartridge name in the cartridge path. Cartridge path is very similar to Java class path. The idea is that whatever you have here, anytime I'm actually trying to access anything on the storefront, that particular, so for example, let me go back. So that particular controller, that particular template, so home, show, all of these must be present in one of the valid cartridges. If that's not the case, then it will not be able to find it. And I will actually get an error that that particular resource does not exist. What about the built-in CMS option? I think I took this already. Am I correct that purchases on a site will sync to Salesforce as opportunity products? Yes, so there is actually, this is not by default. There is actually what we call as a solution kit, which is available. So if you just search for B2C Commerce solution kits, there are a number of kits available for this. And one of the kits just does exactly what the question is, that it actually is able to take all the data from Commerce Cloud and sync it back to the opportunity products, or even your order object and the other objects as well. So that is definitely possible. And then there are other kits as well. These are like seed projects and very commonly used in a lot of implementations. So you don't need to reinvent the wheel. So for example, redeem coupons, abandoned cart, order on behalf of a customer, and they've actually added a few more. So the last time I looked at it, it was about 7 or 8, but now there are a lot more. I think that does it for that question. It does sync with Salesforce. Could you choose the sync with SF objects? Yes, you can do that as part of the connector. You can actually do that. And I believe the connector is also open source on GitHub. So you can actually use that connector. I'll have to check the exact path, but it's a very commonly used connector. They've probably changed the name or something. You should be able to find it. It should actually be in the solution kit as well, but that is possible. So the connector gives you a lot of flexibility. You can actually define your overall mappings, and you can decide that this particular object on the Commerce Cloud side maps to this particular object, this particular field maps to this field. So all that flexibility is there. How does a deployment work? Is it usually to have a CI/CD pipeline for Commerce Cloud for either B2B or B2C? Great question. So yes, you can use tools like Jenkins to write your own build and deployment scripts. And if I were to take you back to this particular slide, as I said, you would also have somewhere here a Git source repository, and then that's where you would actually have multiple branching strategies, something like a master branch, a develop branch, and then you could actually write a complete CI/CD a pipeline to make sure that anytime your master branch is built, it runs a suite of unit tests, and then it is able to deploy to a specific environment. And again, as I said, since it's all JavaScript development, that opens up a lot of flexibility in terms of the tools that you can use to write those tests, as well as to do the CI/CD automation. CI/CD for B2B. B2B is, as I said, it's actually a managed product on top of Salesforce. So I don't think you can, it may be possible, but I'm not really sure if you can actually run CI/CD pipelines for B2B, but B2C, it's definitely possible. In fact, in this repository on GitHub, you will actually find a lot of tools which people have written to do those things as well. I think that was the last question.
Cool. Yeah. Any other questions? Is that it? So thank you again, Gaurav, for this privilege to have you, for sharing all of your knowledge with Commerce Cloud. And I'm sure throughout the years, of course, more and more companies are moving to the cloud, right? So will basically just continue to grow, right?
Yeah, I mean, from a opportunity perspective, I think this was, somebody had asked this earlier, and I'm sorry if I missed it. From a customer perspective, I think I did explain it, but from a partner perspective, and especially in the Salesforce ecosystem, this is a very exciting domain. And I mean, e-commerce is here to stay. There is absolutely no two ways about it. And I think there are a lot of high-end jobs for B2C commerce developers. And if you become a B2C commerce architect with good experience building some large storefronts, then you are very, very well paid. So a lot of opportunities in this space.
That's good. All right.
Awesome.
So I guess that's it. Thank you again, then, Gaurav. I'll
Thank you,
take it from
Gaurav.
here, Neil.
Yep.
Yeah.
Thank you, everybody. I hope you
Thank
found
you.
it useful. Thank you.
Yeah. So if you have other questions, put that on the chat. If you have other questions for Gaurav, and because for now we will go.
Yep. I'll stop the recording then.
Oops. We will go to